Hi, this is Paul Sandhu, continuing with my series on Genesis, the Book of Origins, and going through step by step the real history of the cosmos, the history that we have been taught. History is a very important subject because without understanding our history, our past, from where we have come, it is impossible to understand the present or to plan for the future. So that is one of the problems in our world, is that they live in the matrix and everything that people have been taught is basically a lie. Okay, so I've been talking in my past videos on this series, and there's getting to be quite a collection here, but it doesn't matter because Genesis is such an important book and it has so much information that I could talk about it for the next 1,000 years and probably not cover it all. Anyhow, because it covers the history, see, the Bible is the only book in the entire world that contains the entire history of creation from before time begins right into the infinite future. And particularly it contains the history of man. So whether one believes it or not is a different subject, but it does. It does have a complete history of our origins, our purpose, and our destiny, if one chooses to study and to believe it. And if they don't, that's fine too, because if you don't believe in the Bible, then you do believe in some fantasies, and that's what they are, like evolution, that you just sprung up from some pigs or monkeys or something like that, So stupid, it's insanity. But yet we live in an insane world, so it is no doubt that people would, believe such things. Okay. So anyhow, in the past series on this, in the past videos in this series, I have documented that the Bible teaches, as well as the mythologies, myths, legends of all cultures, particularly the major ones like the Greeks, Romans, and the European mythologies, and also the Eastern mythologies like Hindu mythology, which is very, sophisticated and developed, that it makes account of worlds, plural, that have existed right here on the earth. Okay, the earth and the world are two different things. The earth is a landmass, including some water, but mostly water actually with some landmass, on which people, whether they are humans or something else, they build cities, places of habitation, structures, roads, etc. That is called the world. Okay, so in the Bible it is mentioned that worlds have existed and worlds have been destroyed, as well as in the histories of all mythologies that have a record of some very fantastic civilizations with very advanced technologies and some warfare, like that would be something that you would read, that you would watch maybe in a Star Wars movie, like the Death Star weaponry and such things. There's a record of all those things, okay? Of flying machines, of like atomic type, nuclear type warfare, utter destruction. And again, the Bible talks about that as well. Okay, so because we have been so conditioned to believe lies rather than the truth, that people find this information to be very amazing, and it is amazing information. Okay, for example, when we talk about Lucifer, and everybody generally assumes that he was an angel. And the only reason they do that is people have been asking me, okay, you say that Lucifer was a man. How do you come to that conclusion? And my question is, how did you come to the conclusion that Lucifer was an angel? It's not in the Bible. So how did you come to that conclusion? Somebody fed you that information, right? Right. So if that information was incorrect, then so much of the past history that even Bible scholars have pieced together falls apart. Okay? In Isaiah chapter 14, there is no mention of any angel whatsoever, as opposed to Ezekiel chapter 28, where it clearly identifies that evil creature as an angelic cherubim or a spirit being. Okay, So these are the kind of things, like, a lot of information that people have, they have arrived at it because it has been fed to them, and they have not really read for themselves, studied for themselves as to what the Bible actually teaches. And even when you compare it to mythologies are replete with information about human-like beings, whether you call them mankind or man-like beings. Some of them being giants, very big, but yet they were very man-like in that they had like 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head, 2 eyes, etc. Not always 2 eyes. They had the Cyclops, which had 1 eye, which I'll be talking about. But they were like basically humanoids, you could say. Okay? And there is evidence, and this is what I'll be presenting in this video today, is the evidence of construction, particularly Cyclopean construction, architecture, that is littered throughout the world, from Russia down to the tip of South America, it's in the waters, it's inside the earth, it's everywhere. And these are the questions that most so-called Bibles, Christian people, they never think about these things. Are we to believe that all this happened in the time frame of the 7 generations or 8 generations from Adam to Noah? That all this was done in that time period? Because in this past history, the past 5,000 years, we have pretty good documentation that we know that all these things didn't happen in this time frame. Okay? But how did all this happen, and when did it happen? The amount of construction, ruins that are to be found on this earth that could not possibly have been made by the present race of man, it is so great that one has to stop and think, when did these things happen? And who built them? Okay? If they are real, then there must be a record of them in the Bible, and I will show you that there is. So, I will begin now by talking about some of these civilizations that predate the present one, that began with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. These worlds that predate that time, by a long, long time I might add, and the type of creatures that inhabited those worlds, and the type of structures that they have left behind as evidence that they were here, right here on this earth. They're no longer here. Or at least if they are, some of them are still around. They're very well hidden. And that is another story, that there is so much that is hidden on this earth that there is no possible way inside the earth, inside the waters, inside the seas, inside caves, dens, jungles, forests, that we don't even have a clue as to what exists right here on this earth, never mind up in the heavens. Alright, so let's begin with some video clips about some of these ancient worlds that have come and gone. Okay, as you watch these videos, I'm going to include a couple of clips of these worlds, you could say, at least these cities that are littered all around the world under the seas with massive construction and above ground as well, especially in very high mountainous regions like in South America, in Peru, Bolivia, etc., and also in Russia, China, India, everywhere. Okay, then what we are told, okay, and these are all ruins. So obviously these cities were built by somebody lived in them, and one of the things which is the gigantic proportions of the size of the masonry, the stones that are used in these buildings. It would definitely suggest that the people who built them were rather gigantic in size. And of course, Bible talks about giants being in the earth in the past, and also in mythology everywhere there's stories of giants. One comment I want to make about giants is this: that we lump giants all into one category. But just like there are races of humans, you can have people that are like pygmies, which basically they are like 3 feet tall, to like giant races like the Nordics, etc., that can grow to be 7 or 8 feet tall, or at least like well over 6 feet, so the size is double. Same thing in the case of giants. Their sizes were not all the same. There were different races of giants. Some, as the Bible tells us, we can read in Amos, for example, God says that their height was like the height of cedars. Their strength was like that of oak trees. And I will include a link to that scripture here. Okay? So, on the other hand, there were giants like Goliath, again, whose size is given to us, and that of Og, king of Bashan, that was killed by Moses and the Israelites. Their dimensions are not quite the height of cedars. Like Goliath, for example, the story of David and Goliath is well known by people. He was maybe around 9 or 10 feet tall. Certainly not the height of a cedar. Okay, and Og, the king of Bashan, might have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 or 15 feet tall, which of course is very gigantic by what we would consider to be an average height these days, but still not the height of cedars. And the proportions of these giants, which are found in the latter part of history, latter part meaning in the last 5,000 years or so, they are much smaller in dimension than, say, would have been the Cyclops or the Titans, about which I have talked in the past, but will, make mention again in this video. And I will include a video which will show you the dimensions of what the Bible means when it talks about the Amorite with the heights of a cedar tree. Okay, you will see. So this problem, one of the stories, one of the issues, this is a little bit of a digression, with this Nephilim story, which makes it circles all over, is that Nephilim is a word for giant. That's what it is. It's a person of giant proportions. But all the giants in the Bible, they're not Nephilim. Some of them are called Emims. Some of them are called Zamzumims. So there are different races of giants that are mentioned in the Bible, and they were not all the same size. The Nephilim may well have been the biggest of the giants, but they were certainly not angelic beings, and they certainly were not hybrid beings. Getting back to these videos that you're looking at with the worlds, okay, or these places that existed in the past. Now, as you're watching these underwater cities, etc., the common biblical scholar will say that these are ruins from the times of Noah. Okay. Now, there's one problem with that interpretation, and I'll tell you what it is. The problem is that these ruins are scattered all over the world. Okay. And one of the things they have in it is some writings. Like, for example, the Egyptian pyramids, etc., they have hieroglyphics, they're called. And then they have the Assyrian ones, which have some different type of script. In the Indian subcontinent, it's a different type of script. Chinese, a different type of script. And in South America, it's different again. Okay. Now, in the time of Noah, one of the things that the people had in common was their language and culture. They were the same people. And the same people would use the same language, the same script, and they would also use the same type of construction techniques. So all these constructions, although there is all these ruins, there are a lot of similarities in them, but yet some of them are different enough to indicate that they were not from the same culture. Okay, so these ruins could not just be from the time of Noah, because one of the dead giveaways is the language. Because the language should have been, the script, etc., should have been the same all over, and it is not. So this tells you, like I told you in videos past, that there were ages of time that went by in which different worlds existed on this earth that were destroyed and they were replaced. Now this is also happens in our observation. Let's say, for example, like in any city, there's always redevelopment. There's always destruction, you could say, going on, even without the benefit of war. And because buildings don't just last forever, so they have to be replaced. So this way that these worlds, they are a composite of many different time periods in which these buildings were built. And if you look at some of these buildings, which I will show you, it is clearly obvious that some of that masonry or the stonework is very, very old, upon which somebody built. It's like if you go to London or one of these old cities in Rome, etc., some of the buildings may have been from the 18th, 19th century, but they are not existing in the format that they were originally built. They have been repaired, they have been added to, some of the stones have been replaced, everything, basically in most cases they've been gutted, and though the footprint could be the same, the structure on top is entirely different. Okay, so these structures, they are not built at the same time. So to lump them all into one category, that they were all built in the time of Noah in a period of some 1600 years, in basically the lifespan of like only 8 generations, doesn't make sense. Okay, so there had to be times that when these things were built, and they came before Adam. As I told you, there were 3 ages at least that preceded the present one. They were overseen by at least 3 different creatures in terms of evil. There was one, the first was the angelic race, then was the human race led by Lucifer, and finally is the beastly race, which is led by Satan. All these things, when people, whether they're good or evil, they build places to live. That's normal. They grow crops. They have to eat. They have to have a roof over their heads. So evil people do as much building as good people would. So just because these times were evil and the inhabitants were evil doesn't mean that, they wouldn't have built anything. Of course they would. So these ruins that you're looking at are all over the earth, and they are evidence that our world is not the only world that has existed on this earth. This is evidence that there have gone by ages of time in which different races of humans and other creatures have lived here. They have built things. They have fought wars. They have destroyed these worlds. It has happened. And of course, people who do not believe in the Bible or in God, they always try to, come up with explanations of aliens came from planet X, Y, and Z, and they did that and everything else. No. No, 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 no. This earth was designed, built, created by God. It was given to races of men. And yes, in time, these men became, they were transformed into something entirely different in many cases, because there was a lot of genetic manipulation went on, as I told you in my last video, and therefore we ended up with hybrid beings. We ended up with entirely new species of creatures that came to inhabit and live here. And it is the evidence of these things. It is carved in stone, and it is all over the earth. Okay, I have included a lot of video clips in this program, and there's a reason for that. Most people are not aware of all these anomalous structures that are found all over the world. Okay? And keep in mind that these are ruins. Keep in mind also, as I mentioned in my last video, that the more advanced technology, or the more advanced, maybe I didn't mention this, but the more advanced a civilization becomes, the more easily destructive their construction technologies become. For example, like if we look at 9/11, those 110-story towers, they were basically turned to dust, and by allegedly just a few hundred or a couple of thousand gallons of kerosene fuel. Okay, so our present-day construction techniques are not designed to withstand any amount of force that, any amount of recent, the force of hurricanes or the force of major storms, tornadoes, etc. These buildings get destroyed, earthquakes, they get destroyed very, very easily. Okay, so advanced civilization like ours, if it were subjected to let's say what happened on 9/11, something in the scale 100 times, 1,000 times that. It would probably destroy like all of New York City, and the evidence of its ever having existed would completely disappear. So the point here is that if I am correct about these ages of time, that the further back in time we go, the more advanced the civilizations become, and there has been a deterioration since the beginning. The first administrators of God's creation, the angelic race, they were the most technologically advanced of all. As we are told about the anointed cherub in Ezekiel 28, he is called full of wisdom. Okay? And therefore, their knowledge and understanding was greater than what we have at the present time. So their construction techniques of the people that inhabited the first earth would have been far more advanced. And therefore, of those ages that go right back into the mists of time, there probably is not hardly any evidence that has been left. Okay. So these major constructions, which actually came in the later ages, built out of stone, and there must have been a reason why they built out of stone, because they probably were aware of how easily destroyed the buildings such as ours are, and therefore they wanted something perhaps a little more sturdier. I'm not sure, I'm just speculating here. But what we need to observe here is the enormous size of these buildings. Okay, so that again suggests something here, that in the process of time, the creatures that came to inhabit the earth, they were not typical average size human beings. There was something anomalous about them. One of the anomalies was their sheer size. And I will also play a little, clip from a Hollywood movie to give you an idea of the scale. Because it is only people of those kind of proportions that would even think of employing size of blocks of stone, etc., the size like you're seeing on the screen, in their construction. Even like a giant race, say for example like Goliath, they may be 9-10 feet tall. I do not believe they would be able to accomplish feats like what there's happened here, and never mind people like, average sized people like today. Like these stones, it is not even possible to move them even today with all the machinery that we have, especially in these remote places like up in the Ural Mountains in Russia, and up in the Andes Mountains in South America, or the Himalayas in India. It is not possible for these machines to even reach up there. Okay, so the techniques, the technology that was employed, and the very people that built them, they were not what we would consider to be normal human beings, yet they were flesh and blood. Yet they were physical beings, because these are physical structures built to be inhabited by creatures that are flesh and not spirit. And I just want to add here, that just looking at these videos or pictures, it is not really possible to get an idea of the scale and size of these boulders, these rocks that are used. It's literally like almost mountainous, like sometimes when you drive through the Rocky Mountains or something, you look at the side of a mountain wall and there'll be like this one big piece of rock which is just gigantic. It is like literally mountainous how big these stones are that were used in this construction. So the story that is told by these stones is of the worlds on this earth being much, much older than our present one, which is, civilization now dates back some less than 5,000 years. That is after the flood. But including the time before the flood, is no more than 6,000 years old. And this is evidence, like I said, from the top to the bottom, that earth was inhabited far longer and by a far greater number of people. And again, I qualify people as not just being mankind, but different types of humanoid creatures, let's say these giants or these cyclops, etc., or the titans, that they were here And they built these places, and this is the evidence which has been left behind for us. And this is again, proving God has left this for us to study and to come to the realization that it is the Bible that is correct. When it talks about ages of time, when it talks about that God created the worlds, not just a single world. And again, as I explained in some of my previous videos, it had to be like that because God was going to allow evil to come into existence in his creation, and evil had to be given time to be born, to grow, to mature, and to reach full age. And that did not happen overnight, my friends. Okay, now as you watch this battle scene from the movie Wrath of the Titans, which involves this battle with the Cyclops, I want to bring an interesting fact to your attention, which is the term Cyclopean masonry or Cyclopean architecture. What you've been looking at with these massive stones in these different clips I've been playing, one fact that stands out is that these stones are not cut in straight lines. They're different shapes, yet they fit together perfectly. So how they were made to fit together, what techniques were used, nobody really knows. But these are all over, that these stones are all over the world, and they are constructed using Cyclopean architectural techniques. Now, the interesting fact that I want to draw your attention to is when they use the term Cyclopean, is that because this was actually built by the Cyclops, who are supposed to have been some of the earliest inhabitants of the earth along with the Titans? Do you see, people just think that this is all like mythology and fiction, and the Bible is absolutely nonfiction. And in mythology, although it's fictionalized, there is a lot of fact in it as well. So keep that term in mind, Cyclopean masonry. Okay, H.P. Lovecraft, who was one of the preeminent horror fiction writers of the 20th century, he wrote a lot about this Cyclopean architecture. And here's his website. It's called The Lovecraftsman. And in it gives you 5 real-world examples of H.P. Lovecraft's Cyclopean architecture. And you can see here, these pictures here, and especially this one here, right? This is from, I don't know, I think in Greece somewhere. But you can see that these are odd-shaped stones. They're not like all cut in straight lines, yet they fit perfectly together. And this is one of the most massive structures in the world. This is called Sacsayhuaman. It is in Peru, in South America. And if you look at this picture here, you see that this gives you the scale of how big these stones are. But again, you can see they're not cut in straight lines, but they do fit together perfectly. This is an example of Cyclopean architecture, and I would contend that these things were actually built by the giant Cyclops in a very, very distant past, in ages long, long gone. when it comes to mythology or information in the Bible, such as about the giants or about other creatures, such as it mentions satyrs, unicorns, dragons, leviathan, behemoth, okay, talks about the heavens being destroyed, we can either think that it is all fiction or it is factual, as the evidence of all these structures which I have shown you proves that there was a time when there were some very, very big people on this earth that built all these things. So, and when you combine that with the terminology, for example, the use of the word Cyclopean, then it is a logical conclusion that these creatures were indeed real. But they did not exist like in the recent past. Their history goes a lot further back than that. Now here's one last clip about megalithic structures around the world, and then I'm going to move on as to the state of the earth as we first find it in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, when it says that it was without form and void, which means that it was in a state of barren wilderness, broken down, destroyed, or in a state of decay, which is not how God created it in the beginning.
We're here with our local guides, Dr. Teo Paredes, anthropologist, and Wilco, who is a local indigenous wisdom keeper, the site of Sacsayhuaman, or Sacsayuma. And this is the largest polygonal wall in the Americas. The quarry is 8 kilometers, or 5 miles away. The question is, how were these stones moved from the quarry, which is up and over a series of mountains? Conventional archaeology says that because there was a high population in Cusco, people would be able to simply roll the stones on top of wooden rollers, that sort of distance, and pulling with ropes, etc., etc. But they can't explain how something of this size was cut from the bedrock wall, A, and B, the fact is that in Inca times, the only trees that grew in this area are small scrub trees that do not have straight, not stems, but trunks. And so the alternative explanation is that this was built thousands of years before the Inca and was done by a race that understood and utilized forms of resonance and vibration. In other words, lost ancient, high technology.
I think by now it's clear that all that exists on this earth cannot have been built by the current inhabitant of the earth, which is modern man. So that again is the evidence I wanted to provide in this program, that the worlds have existed here. They were inhabited by humans, human-like creatures, humanoids, by giants, by other mythical creatures. That all creatures of mythology, they are real. Okay, they seem very fantastic to us, and we call it fantasy, but there's not fantasy, it is reality. And therefore, we have to remove the blinders, we have to remove the programming of disinformation that we are fed with since the day we are born, and we have to start looking at this world through fresh eyes. Okay, and of course, if all this information is found in the Bible, then as a Christian, why would you think any different? Okay, that is my question. So, to repeat, that ages of time have gone by, when the gap theory, which I mentioned in my last video, is very valid, that between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, which means it was a darkness-covered barren wilderness, and that is not how God created it, so it became like that. How did it become like that? It became like that through the wars that were fought by these ancient races that inhabited the earth, and these wars with weaponry that was quite fantastic as well. something like out of a sci-fi movie like Star Wars. So I'm going to close this program with another clip of some of these wars that are mentioned that many people have compared to nuclear war, and that are recorded in the pages of the books like the Mahabharata, which is one of the major texts of Indian mythology, and also, mind you, in the Bible, because it talks about the world being a wilderness, it talks about cities being broken down, and therefore, let's see that what it is that caused the earth to become without form and void, when it is very apparent that that is not how it was created in the beginning.
Originally, I had included a clip here from the History Channel, which depicted some type of ancient warfare that they said was being where nuclear weapons had been used. I do not believe that nuclear weapons were used in the past or even in the present time, but I believe that there was some sort of energy weaponry of a much greater power than any explosive device that exists today. The sheer extent of the destruction that has occurred on this earth, especially of the megalithic structures that cannot be destroyed with simple weaponry, even a so-called nuclear bomb. Therefore, there had to be something entirely different. But there are records, as for example, in the Mahabharata of the Hindu script, mythology, they talk about these weapons which had more power than 1,000 suns, etc. And then, of course, in the Bible, the Apostle Peter wrote that the heavens at some point had been destroyed. So you see, those are not destroyed with nuclear weapons. There's something much greater that must have existed. If the heavens themselves were gone, would have been destroyed, I don't even begin to imagine what sort of weaponry must have been used, but it was used in the past. So those worlds that once existed here, the evidence of it still exists today. And also the evidence exists that they were destroyed and they were ruined. And that since all this could not have happened in the last 6,000 years since Adam was created, then it proves that there were worlds that existed before. And as I have taught in many of my other videos, especially the one on the gap theory, there's an extended one in about 2-hour long video that I have on my channel here, and I would highly recommend that you watch it. That the story of the past ages is a story of the birth and growth of evil, and evil was very much present when Adam was created. So obviously the story of the rise and the birth of evil goes back many ages before Adam. So this clip that I'm including now is not the one in the original video that I have made, because when I uploaded that video, YouTube blocked it worldwide because I had used a clip from a History Channel video, Meanwhile, these clips are all over YouTube, and so it's sort of ironic that you get these clips from YouTube and they're not from the History Channel. A lot of people have uploaded them on their own channels, and yet when I try to include it in my video, it's blocked worldwide. But anyways, that's besides the point. This clip is sufficient to show that there are many mythological records and writings and carved in stone that speak about some kind of cataclysmic destruction that has occurred on the earth on an earth-wide scale. And as I said, the Bible even talks about the heavens being destroyed, so that destruction reached far beyond, just the boundaries of this earth. And therefore the weaponry that was in possession of the people that existed in those days is truly more than anything we have seen in any sci-fi movie till today.
Hindu texts dating from thousands of years ago seem to suggest that some kind of highly advanced weapon resembling an atomic bomb was set off on the earth some 12,000 of years ago. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are Sanskrit epics thought to have been written in the 8th or 9th century BC and are accounts of the Kurukshetra war and the battle between Rama and the demon Ravana respectively. Could an atomic bomb have gone off on Earth 12,000 years ago? Some of the passages from the Mahabharata suggesting a nuclear conflict, a single projectile charged with all the power in the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes an entire race. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without any apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves into the river. Nothing out of the ordinary in and of themselves, since many religions have epic stories and poems mixing both periods of real historical events and fictional characters. Many of the descriptions of the battles within these texts speak of devastating weapons having the power of the sun and striking down huge areas of land. They also mention huge death tolls similar to those found with a nuclear weapon. Ordinarily, once again, nothing unusual, as most historical stories tend to over-exaggerate the power of weapons and figures involved as well. Where this story becomes more interesting, however, is the discovery in the early 1990s of an area in Rajasthan that remains to this day highly irradiated. When ground was broken on a new housing development, an ancient city, and dangerous levels of radiation were discovered, leading scientists to surmise that the area was hit by a nuclear weapon between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago, destroying the majority of the city and killing an estimated 500,000 people. How the ancient Indian powers at the time developed nuclear weapons is a mystery, although of course no records exist showing anything like the levels of technology needed to develop these kinds of weapons. There is also a mysterious crater near the Bombay area of India that defies explanation that could fit the bill as a possible detonation site for a nuclear weapon also. Kesari Mohan Ganguly said of the bodies found in the ancient city, they discovered skeletons scattered about the cities, many holding hands and sprawling in the streets as if some instant, horrible doom had killed its inhabitants. People were just lying, unburied, in the streets of the city. There seemed no one available to bury them afterward. In ancient times there were no weapons capable of causing this kind of devastation. Certainly, nothing that would have left the dead unburied or left radiation thousands of years later. Nuclear weapons seem to fit the descriptions and evidence left behind.
So the history of creation goes back a lot further than we have been taught, either by mainstream academia with their phony baloney evolutionary Big Bang theories, or even from the church, which would have us believe that everything just goes back 6,000 years and not more. No, history goes back a long ways, and that history is to be found in the pages of the Bible. And as you follow along the videos that I have in my Bible history playlist, you will begin to understand as to why God, who is the creator of all, why he made people and other creatures in the ages before Adam, and what things they did, what worlds they built, how these worlds were destroyed, what wars were fought between the angels, the men that existed, and other creatures, other fantasy-like creatures such as giants, cyclops, etc. that I talked about in this video. They all existed, they were real, and they existed right here on Earth. This is where all this happened, and this is where we find the condition of the earth to be in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, that it was without form and void because it had been destroyed and left a ruined wasteland. So I will end this presentation here with another clip about giants that have existed all across, that whose remains and evidence for which has been found all across the face of the earth. And I will add this caveat that despite all that you might have heard, giants were just simply big people. They were not hybrids. They were not like the offspring of fallen angels or anything like that. They were mutants that at some point in the past ages, the human genes had been tampered with, and this gene of gigantism was created, which brought about these flesh and blood creatures, which are like man, but they were much, much bigger. Some of them may have grown to be like 30, 40 feet tall, and even, anywhere from 8, 10 feet tall and higher. Okay, so these giants have existed, and the evidence for their existence is to be found in not just in mythology, but in artwork, in temples, in other ancient ruins, and in images, and in statues and sculptures, but also in like bones and skeletons and such things. Okay, so thank you for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.
Almost all the nations of the world, there are myths and legends about giants, remarkably similar to humans. All the world's faiths and religions talk about them. On Earth, there are no inhabited land, where neither would live, according to legend, giants. In the minds of people so deeply ingrained belief in them, even the huge stones of Europe, megaliths, or South America, and the pyramids of Egypt called Cyclopean buildings. Even the official history confirms that once lived on the earth giants, who apparently were very similar to humans. Mention of the giants found in the literary and historical documents of different ages. Numerous findings indicate that, of the race of giants is not an invention. They actually lived on the planet and has a significant influence on the course of history. But what, then, to explain the existence of similar legends and myths have very different and distant peoples of the world? The fact that the giants appear in all of these sources is not in any way related to each other, cannot be a coincidence. Probably lie at the heart of the historical facts that have been handed down from generation to generation as a tradition about 5.3-meter people. On the reality of race of giants in the distant past of our planet and show the various finds, recorded in ancient historical documents. Now it is proved that the atmosphere of the Earth in ancient times contained 50% more oxygen than now. This was revealed by studies of air bubbles in amber. Due to this fact was found the answer to the question of the existence of giant plants and animals. This fact gave reason to believe that human nature is also supposed to be the other. The air, saturated with oxygen, provides life race of giants. Many of the legends of giants exist in the Nordic and Germanic countries, Tibet. There is a theory that long before the beginning of a new era in the world existed side by side, two people, men and giants, which were 3 times more than the first. In addition to the myths of various peoples in the Bible, they were referred to in the Greek stories. Of all the legends of giants can form an overall picture. First, the giants, according to legend, had incredible strength. It is through this power the world has many monuments giants such as Tibetan City of Gods, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, the Egyptian Sphinx, etc. For example, in Lebanon, in the bottom Baalbekskoy terraces on 3 large blocks, each of 800 tons. They were fitted together with amazing accuracy, to the millimeter. And that even the most modern construction equipment is a daunting task. Only to have to be able to move one such unit, it would force more than 40,000 people. Also, according to legend, giants possessed such knowledge, to a level which has not yet reached even modern science. For example, Atlanta, which opened people mysteries of astronomy, making it an immortalized in the form of a strong man, who supports Teotihuacan. It exactly matches the structure of the solar system. 2 churches that are in it, symbolizing the planet Pluto and Uranus, and the latter were only discovered by scientists in the 20th century. In the Old Testament says that there were giants on the relationship, God's sons and daughters of men, i.e. are the result of mixing blood. According to the text of the Bible, God, seeing how utterly corrupt mankind, sent a punishment for people, the Great Flood. Tradition has it that the giants' frivolous attitude to the flood, and so for the most part and were lost. In the Babylonian books say that on board the ark went only enormous Ounce Noi and locked him up for a strong grid. After it was over, Ounce went to Palestine to live. Describes the fate of the giant is Thor. After leaving Egypt, the people of the Jews, Moses once sent scouts to Palestine, and the giants met the king. Jews subsequently took over his bed. It long has been more than 4 meters. Another famous historical character is the giant Goliath, who was growing more than 3 meters. Subsequently it fought and was defeated by King David. Archaeological evidence of the truth of the sacred books. Giants, according to legend, tried to escape in the mountains of the Caucasus from the advancing waters. Searchers found there was in the 20th century remains of giant humans. One of the latest finds were amazing 4-meter skeletons, which are found in one of the mountain caves of Georgia. Herodotus wrote that the warriors of Sparta were on the staff of the giant skeleton Orestes during military campaigns. The skeleton is 3.5 meters. The historian Josephus described as giants, and noted that they had a thunderous voice. In the books of Pausanias also contains information about giants. Thus, it is history written by Pausanias about how to Syria from the river bed Sront raised human skeleton, which reached 5.5 meters. About 4-meter skeleton of information, and in medieval book entitled History and Greed. The skeleton was found in Cumberland. What is, the skeleton was in military garb, and not far from it found a huge sword and axe. Judge from America E.P. West, who lived in the 19th century, and was fond of digging, found the burial mounds in the forests of western Missouri. Inside the burial grounds were huge human bones. For example, the lower jaw of one of the skeleton's jaw dimensions exceed the average person at least twice. And at the end of the 19th century in Ireland was found sedigitate mummy, whose growth was nearly 4 meters. This finding was a huge publicity and watched tens of thousands of people at the shows in Dublin, Manchester, and Liverpool. And in 1912 in the state of Nevada in the United States were found 3-meter red-haired mummies. Archaeologist Ralph von Koenigswald in Hong Kong in 1935 found human teeth that are larger than 5 times the size of the teeth common man. On the island of Ponape in the 1970 American expedition of archaeologists from the ground picked up the skeletons of people who were twice as modern man. In Turkey in the 1950s, the road builders accidentally stumbled on the skeletons, which alone femurs had a length of 120 centimeters in a lot of these cases. For example, Alaska, 1950. Bulldozer-leveled burial mounds on the surface appeared fossil bones and skulls of people. Skull width was 30 centimeters and a height of 58 centimeters. On the jaws were 2 rows of teeth. Length of the shin bone was from 150 to 180 centimeters. In southern Mongolia in 1999 by British paleontologists found a fossilized skeleton of a giant structure of the skull as evidence of the fact that during his life he had the speech organs. In the long bones of his feet up to 7 meters, and the total height of the giant was 15 feet. More recorded cases of detection of giant footprints. For example, in Nevada found footprints in 60 centimeters, the age of which is about 248 million years. And in Turkmenistan have found a footprint, the age of 150 million years. You should also mention the trilobite, crushed foot, clad in a great sandal. Here, the age and does incredible, 600 million years old. Where is now in all these amazing discoveries? Many of them were lost. Some are in museums, but the scientific world ignores their existence, as most scientists do not take seriously tales about giants. From some of the findings, is rumored to rid themselves, archaeologists. For example, they were burned like the Nevada mummy. Without any explanation from scientists, some disappeared like the skeletons of Ponape, and she then lost expedition funding.
Some say I've been around, I know I've covered a lot of ground, but I have not forgotten. I've left a lot of miles behind, I've gone through changes in my mind, but I have not forgotten. I've not forgotten the Father's love, the sweet touch of His Spirit. I've not forgotten what Jesus has done. I know His power keeps me near, yeah, and teaches me to hear Him. Sometimes I doubt like everyone, I try to confuse what He's begun, but I have not forgotten. I stumbled on those little things that trap both simpletons and kings, but I have not forgotten. I have not forgotten. I've not forgotten the Father's love, the sweet touch of His Spirit. I've not forgotten what Jesus has done. I know His power keeps me near, yeah. It teaches me to hear Him. I know I'll stand someday by grace, without fear before His face, and I'll say I know You, and I have not forgotten. And when He takes that final look and points to my name in His book, He'll say, here you are, you're not forgotten.